Good morning and welcome to Calm Signal. I have a story that I want to tell, and this explains why I do what I do. And I hope you'll enjoy it. I hope you listen. My story is my daughter's story and the journey that changed both of us. If you've ever had a story sitting on your heart for years, but every time you thought about telling it, you just weren't ready. Well, that's me. I've wanted to tell this story for a really long time, not because I was ashamed of my daughter, never. I've always been very proud of her. What I struggled with was knowing the time when the time was right. I wanted to protect the people that I love. I wanted enough time to pass for us to heal. And honestly, I wanted to be in a better place in my own life before sharing something so deeply personal. Yesterday morning during my meditation, I asked myself a question, as I often do. How can I serve more people today? And almost immediately, one thought came to mind, and it was tell the story. Ugh, I've heard it before, didn't listen to that. This morning during meditation, I asked the same question again, and it was tell a story. So here we go, guys. That's when I realized that this wasn't just another passing thought. The story had been quietly waiting for me for years. Maybe the timing wasn't right before. Maybe I was still living it. Maybe I still had lessons to learn. It was always an excuse. But today, I'm ready. And I'm sharing this story because if there's one parent that's sitting at their kitchen table tonight or this morning, wondering if they're imagining things, if there's one mom or dad questioning themselves because everyone seems to be saying your child is doing fine, but something inside them says otherwise, I hope our story reminds you that you're not alone. This is a story about my daughter. It's about ADHD. It's about advocacy. It's about learning differences, but it's also about something much bigger than that. It's about hope. And it's about never giving up on someone you love. And it's about unexpected ways our children sometimes become our greatest teachers. Before I begin, I'd love to ask one favor, and it's please stay with me to the end. Because after everything our family went through, I want to share the things I wish somebody had told me years ago, things that may help you navigate your own journey a little differently with hope and a little more encouragement as well, and some encouragement as well. So let me tell you about my daughter. She was beautiful, and she was happy, and she was a vibrant young little girl. She loved to sing. She loved to play. If you met her, you probably would never have guessed anything was different about her. Looking back now, I realized our journey, our story had already begun. When I think back to those early years, I don't remember a little girl who was struggling. I remember a little girl who was full of life, loved to play, very, very similar to any child around her. I never would have thought something was wrong. And I certainly didn't think ADHD. But there were signs. There were things that stood out. The first was toe walking. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but she spent so much time walking on her toes. They were constantly reminding her to put your feet down. The interesting thing was, it didn't seem like she was choosing to do it. It was almost as if her body naturally returned to that position without her even realizing it. Eventually, we took her to the doctor. She even went through physical therapy because she had spent so much time on her toes. Later, we were told she'd probably grow out of it, and eventually she did. Not till kindergarten, though. The second thing that stands out to me now was the potty training. She was afraid. She wouldn't go to the bathroom. She was scared to use the toilet, so she would hold everything in. And obviously, that creates problems. As a mom, of course, I was worried. I wondered how school would go. She was going into kindergarten. Would her teacher understand? Would my child be embarrassed? Thankfully, she had an amazing kindergarten teacher who handled everything with kindness and so much patience. And that too eventually resolved. But nothing pointed me towards ADHD. Nothing made me think we were beginning a journey that would change both of our lives. If I'm being honest, from birth through 5 years old, she still seemed like every average child. However, there's that little voice. When my daughter started school, everything seemed pretty normal at first. Kindergarten was good. It was a happy year. First grade didn't raise any major concerns either. Children are learning so many different things during those early years, and everyone develops at their own pace. Nothing seemed unusual. But somewhere around second grade, some things started changing. It wasn't overnight, it was just little things. Homework, which should have taken a reasonable amount of time, became thoroughly exhausting. I'd sit with her while she worked, not to do it for her, but to simply support her. That's when I started noticing something I couldn't quite explain. And that was she would drop her pencil. Something as small as dropping her pencil. But she would do it over and over and over again. So she'd climb out of her chair, she'd pick it up, she'd sit back down, write for a moment, and then it would happen again. At first, I wondered if she was just trying to avoid homework. I think every parent has moments when they wonder if their child is simply distracted or trying to get out of doing something they don't really enjoy doing. But as I watched her, something didn't feel intentional. It felt like she wanted to do the work, but she just couldn't stay with it. And then I looked over and she'd be staring off into space. Not because she didn't care. It was almost as if her attention had been pulled from her somewhere else without her permission. I would gently bring her back. She'd try again, then the cycle would repeat itself. I remember feeling torn. Part of me thought, she's just being a kid. The other part of me kept whispering, something isn't adding up. So I did that. I did what I thought a parent would do. I asked the teachers over and over again, she's doing fine, they would say. Nothing to worry about. She's doing good in class. And I questioned myself more than I questioned them. It got to that point. I remember thinking maybe I'm overreacting, maybe I'm reading too much into this. So I just waited. I let it go and I waited, watched and waited, but waited. And I understand why I doubted myself, because at the time it was simply a mom trying to make sense of something she couldn't yet explain. As time passed, I began noticing struggles that weren't limited to just school. It seemed like anything involving a list of instructions became overwhelming. Homework, reading, cleaning her room, even simple everyday tasks. If I asked her to clean up her room and gave her more than one thing at a time, she would forget, or she would get overwhelmed, it seemed, with instruction to do something. And at the time, I didn't understand why. Again, I wasn't thinking ADHD. I wasn't thinking about executive functioning. I wasn't thinking about learning differences. I was simply just trying to understand my little girl. And the more I watched her, the more I realized that something just wasn't right. She wasn't refusing to do things. She wasn't being lazy. She wasn't trying to make my life difficult. She was struggling in ways neither of us could understand. As time went on, the struggles continued to reveal themselves in different ways. One of the biggest was reading. My daughter kept telling me she hated it. At first, I thought maybe she wasn't interested in books, but she loved me reading to her. A lot of children go through phases like that, but then I started paying closer attention. Whenever she would bring home the school library books, she always chose just picture books of horses, just picture books. She wanted stories that she could enjoy without struggling. And that told me something. She didn't hate learning. She didn't hate stories. She hated feeling defeated. Then one day she told me something that had stayed with me ever since. And she told me that the kids laughed when she read aloud, while you do your oral reading turn. As a mother, that hurt my heart when people would laugh at her. No child wants to feel embarrassed for trying. No child wants to become afraid by raising their hand because they're worried about making a mistake. Looking back now, I realized she wasn't avoiding reading because she didn't care. She was avoiding the pain that had become attached to it. These are all just kids. They don't know any better. I also began noticing something at home. She could read the same paragraph several times, but she spent a lot of time trying to read through one page, and she struggled. And then she struggled to remember what she read and had to read it again. If she couldn't fully understand the paragraph, how could she possibly answer the questions that came after it? Homework became longer, frustration became bigger, and my heart kept telling me the same thing. This wasn't a lack of effort. This was a child who was working twice as hard just to keep up. I still didn't have all the answers. But by then, I knew I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. Not anymore. So, by this point, I couldn't ignore. Homework was becoming harder still. Reading was becoming more frustrating. Things weren't getting done. She was getting, not good grades on her stuff. And even though everyone kept reassuring me that she was doing fine, clearly she wasn't doing fine. There was that whisper, that mom's intuition. Keep asking questions. I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. I wasn't looking for a diagnosis. I was simply trying to understand my daughter. I remember going back to her teachers again and again. She's fine. Don't worry. And again, I'm overreacting. I'm second-guessing myself. Let the professionals, I trust them. The results suggested everything fell. The results made me question myself. Her results, her papers, the results suggested that she wasn't doing well, but somehow they knew that and weren't sharing that part. I was just getting, she's fine. So eventually, the school agreed to do an internal evaluation. They suggested everything fell within a normal range. And I remember looking at those results. They must be seeing something I'm not. But they're not seeing what I'm seeing. And that wasn't because I believed I knew more than the professionals. It was because I knew my daughter. I knew how hard she was working. I knew how exhausted she was becoming. I knew she was dreading reading. I knew she was dreading going to school. So I made an important decision of this journey. I asked for an outside evaluation. I wanted someone who specialized in working with children to spend the time necessary to truly understand what and how my daughter learned. And looking back, that decision changed everything. In many ways, it was the beginning of finally getting some answers. When my daughter was 7, I finally took the steps that I had made to get the outside evaluation with a professional psychologist who specialized in working with children. After spending time with my daughter and listening carefully, not just to the testing, but also to what I was observing at home, we finally had some answers, and she was diagnosed with ADHD. Now, people have asked me over the years what that moment felt like. And honestly, my first feeling wasn't fear. It was validation, and it was clarity. And for so long, I had questioned myself. I wondered if I was imagining things. You know how that goes when you question yourself and you second guess yourself. You don't want there to be something wrong. Now that I thought we understand this better, how can we help her? The diagnosis wasn't the end of her journey. It was the beginning of learning how my daughter learned and how her mind worked and how we could help her, succeed without asking her to become someone she wasn't. So when my daughter was 7, we began intervention services. I was hopeful. I remember thinking, okay, now we know what we're dealing with. Now we can help her. I was grateful that the people were finally paying attention. Every teacher, that she was in, every class, they knew her circumstances. But they would send home questionnaires and keep asking me what I was seeing at home. And I was like, well, what am I noticing? How's homework going? And I kept thinking, I'm not the professional. I felt like I was being questioned all the time. And I guess that's good. But what I wanted was answers from them and what they were saying. I knew what happened every afternoon at our kitchen table. I knew she came home completely exhausted, not the kind of tired that comes from running around and playing all day, the kind of exhaustion that made her want to lie down and sleep. And looking back now, I believe she was working so hard just to get through the school day that by the time she came home, she had nothing left. So at the time, I didn't have words like mental fatigue. I just knew my girl was tired. As the weeks went on, another concern began growing in my heart. And because she was pulled out of her classroom several times a week for this intervention, she was missing time with her classmates. She wasn't just missing lessons, she was missing opportunities to build friendships. And at first, I didn't realize how much that would matter, but slowly I began seeing the emotional cost. She wasn't just becoming harder. It wasn't just becoming harder academically. It was becoming harder emotionally. I was relieved that she was finally receiving help, but I also realized something important. Getting support was only the first step. Understanding what she really needed, that was going to take some time. And although I didn't know it yet, getting support was only the first step. Understanding what she really needed, that was going to take a while, more evaluation. But because I wanted to understand my daughter well enough to help her become everything she was capable of being, I was in it. As she moved through 6th and 7th grade, I began noticing something that concerned me even more, though, than her grades. The struggle was longer It was no longer, it was no longer just academic. It was becoming emotional. And while I was grateful again for her getting support every year, there was another side that I hadn't fully anticipated. And several times a week, she was pulled out of her classroom. Still, she wasn't able to make friends. She wasn't able to build relationships. And she was still coming home completely exhausted. Almost every Monday morning, and this was something fairly new, she became ill. She complained she didn't feel well. This was notoriously every Monday. Her absences slowly began increasing. At first, I thought she might simply be catching every virus, but somehow I just knew that wasn't it. I started asking the school again, is there anything else we can do? Her school experience is suffering. The answers were always kind, but they never seemed to reach what I was seeing at home. During the same time, our family was also going through a divorce, which added stress, I know. There was uncertainty at home, and I think that added another layer of fear and sadness to what my daughter was already carrying. We began counseling to help her through those changes, so she had outside support, not just parent support, professional support. I was trying everything I knew to do, but as the months passed, it became harder to ignore what I was seeing. And this wasn't simply a child who struggled with schoolwork. Now this was a child who was beginning to lose joy and that she had once carried. She had no cares in the world when she was younger. I knew we hadn't reached the end of the answers yet. Somewhere ahead, there had to be another door to open. I just didn't know where to find it. As middle school continued, I began noticing the changes. Report cards, test scores were not good. Absences, of course. The bright, happy girl I had always known seemed to be carrying weight that was becoming harder and harder to hide. She'd always been a sensitive child, but now I could see that sensitivity turning inward. She wasn't taking care of herself the way she used to. Things like basic self-care, which had once been part of her normal routine, began kind of slipping. I think she was simply overwhelmed. It's not that she didn't care. School had become exhausting. Friendships were difficult. And I think she was carrying more than any child could have carried alone. As time went on, I also learned that some of her friendships that she did have weren't very healthy at all. And one in particular, whom I believe was her friend, who I thought was her friend, was actually bullying her. And years later, she shared stories with me that confirmed that. And I think just things like being blocked from using the bathroom to, she just told me she was feeling embarrassed and alone. And she was afraid I was going to have her stop seeing this friend. It was the only person who seemed to be willing to include her in anything. That realization was heartbreaking, really. There were also moments when she came home and shared experiences with certain teachers that deeply concerned me. She told me that she was asked before. She had stopped caring for herself, but to have somebody say that you smell bad or that your hair smells bad is a little, heartbreaking as well. And then she told me that when she didn't understand a question in the classroom, the responses were sometimes, "Didn't you read it? Weren't you listening? We just went over it." So the patience wasn't there. Whether these moments were intended the way my daughter experienced them or not, what mattered to me was how they made her feel at the time. And she became afraid to raise her hand, afraid to ask a question, afraid of drawing any type of attention to herself at all. She was losing her confidence. And then came the moment that changed everything. My daughter's older sister came to me, and she had noticed cuts on my daughter. Until that moment, I had no idea she had been self-harming. My heart sank. And as a family, we had an intervention. We gathered together, and there were no accusations, no anger, only concern. I remember my daughter breaking down into tears, and through those tears, she said something I will never forget. Her comments were, "It is just so hard." And those four words changed me. In that moment, I realized that it was no longer about helping my daughter do better in school. This was about helping her believe that life could feel hopeful again. I knew then we needed a different level of help. After our intervention, I knew in my heart that we had to get a different level of assistance. Love my daughter too much to keep hoping things would somehow get better on their own. I didn't know exactly what that next step was, but I just knew we needed one. That's when I made a decision that changed everything. I took money out of my savings account and I hired an educational advocate. At the time, it felt like a huge investment. Looking back, it was one of the best decisions I had ever made. Our advocate had been doing this work for more than 25 years. She had raised 2 sons who were adults at this time, one with autism. So she understood this journey, not only as a professional, but as a mother. And that mattered to me. I trusted her. She became the person who truly understood our story from the beginning to the end. She attended our meetings. She helped write letters. She explained things I didn't understand. She knew the system. And for any of you that have ever read the special ed rights manual, that's big, it's long, and it's very misunderstood. And for the first time after we hired this advocate, I no longer felt like I was trying to navigate the manual by myself. One of the greatest gifts she gave me wasn't just knowledge, it was confidence. Before she came into our lives, I often walked in to meetings. Most of them were Zoom. I questioned myself. I wondered if I was asking too much. I cry. With her by my side, everything changed. There were meetings where I hardly had to say a word. She already knew my daughter's experience, and she knew what information mattered. She knew how to advocate in ways I simply hadn't learned yet. I also want parents to know something I didn't know back then. There are free advocates available in many communities, and they can be incredibly helpful, but you may get a different one every time you inquire. So, and that's what was happening or started to happen with me. I didn't want to start over with someone new every time I had a question. I wanted consistency. I wanted someone who understood not only the paperwork, but who understood my daughter. So as we continue working together, my advocate helped me realize we still didn't have the complete picture. Yes, my daughter had an ADHD diagnosis, but I knew there was more to understand. Together, we decided to request a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation. That decision would become another turning point in our journey. For the first time, I felt like we weren't just searching for answers anymore. We were finally asking the right questions. As we continued to work with our advocate, she helped me realize something I'd never considered before: how my daughter actually learned, where the learning differences began and where they ended. And it also ruled out autism, but with an overlap. Our advocate strongly recommended that we request a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation. The evaluation lasted nearly 8 hours for my daughter, and it was exhausting. She hated every minute of it. And as her mom, it was heartbreaking to watch because I knew how mentally demanding that kind of testing would be for her. But I also knew why we were doing it. We weren't looking for another label. We were just looking for understanding. When the results finally came back, everything became much clearer. And for the first time, we weren't just hearing that my daughter had ADHD. We began to understand her complete learning profile. The evaluation showed that she was living with persistent depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD combined presentation, and specific learning disabilities affecting reading, written expression, and math. Reading those results was emotional, not because they changed who my daughter was. She was still the same beautiful young girl she had always been, but because for the first time we finally understood why so many everyday tasks had been so difficult for her. The report didn't tell us who my daughter was. They just helped explain how she learned. Struggles. We started looking for other avenues of education. We started inquiring about other schools that were able to work with kids with special special aid. We went to 3 different schools, and my daughter was a part of each of them. And they were all beautiful. They were all wonderful. But I wanted her to be part of the decision making. And when we walked into the school we eventually chose, something felt very different. The teachers understood children like my daughter. Every student had access to their own clinician. The staff had specialized training. And by the way, the students having access to their own clinician made me feel so good to know that if she was having trouble, she didn't have to always turn to me. She was turning to a professional that actually could give her some feedback, because I never knew what to say. There was structure there. There was support. There was understanding. Even the little things stood out to me. Students had to check their cell phone. There was a security guard there, which made her feel safe. And the cell phones that got obviously handed back at the end of the day. But parents were welcome into the school for activities and events, and they were creating a true sense of community there. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful. The transition wasn't perfect. In fact, it was difficult at first. My daughter was suddenly surrounded by teenagers from all over the state who had struggled with their own learning differences and emotional struggles. It was overwhelming. And there was more drama than she had ever experienced before. But for the first time, she wasn't the only one who felt different. Little by little, she began to settle in, and she began building relationships, friendships. She began trusting the adults around her. She kept the same clinician every year. One consistent person who truly knew her journey. Then one day she said something I'll never forget. I can finally be myself without feeling judged. And those words brought tears to my eyes at the time. And it still jerks at my heartstrings. For years, I had watched her try to fit into environments that did not understand how she learned. And now she had finally found a place that she felt accepted for exactly who she was, and not that it was wrong. It was the beginning of hope returning to both of us. She was beginning to heal. She was making friends. Her teachers, she was understood. She had a clinician she trusted. I watched her begin to believe in herself again. I thought we had finally reached a place where she could simply focus on being a teenager. But every 6 months, another meeting would come up with the public schools. And the question was always the same. Should she return to public school? Each time my heart would sink. From the outside, it may have seemed like a reasonable question, but they weren't seeing the same person I was seeing. She had too much history there. She had painful memories there. She had too much fear, and she had already told me she would never go back. It wasn't out of defiance. It was because she didn't appreciate the people. It wasn't because she didn't appreciate the people that were trying to help her. She simply couldn't imagine walking back into that place after she had struggled for so many years. And I understood. Healing isn't about, it's not about finding the right, it's not only about finding the right support. Sometimes it's about leaving behind an environment where you no longer feel safe and that you don't fit in to. So every meeting we were asked to prove once again why she needed to stay where she was, finally thriving. Thankfully, I wasn't walking into those meetings anymore myself. I had the advocate. She knew our story. She knew the reports. She knew how much progress my daughter had made. Together, we continued gathering information, documentation, and her progress. And we stayed. It was exhausting, but we stayed. And just when I thought that we could finally exhale, another meeting would be scheduled. And this affected my daughter too, because I had to tell her there was the possibility of her having to go back. And that would have been the possibility of me realizing that she was not going to continue school. I couldn't give up. So I wasn't fighting against a school. I was fighting for my daughter's opportunity to continue growing in a place where she finally felt understood. Advocacy is not about arguing. It's about continuing to speak with love, persistence, and evidence until the people making decisions fully understand what your child needs. And I believed in my daughter. And I wasn't going to stop believing in her just because the road had become difficult. So as we continued to advocate, an opportunity came up and became available to us. And our advocate connected us with an organization that provided financial assistance to families seeking further educational advocacy and legal support. And to be considered, I would have to tell our story. The organization instructed me to gather every document I had and organize it into a binder. At first, I had no idea how much information I had. Notes, evaluations, letters, school reports, every piece told a part of my daughter's story. Second grade, third grade, everything had to be in order, and accurate and true. And looking back now, people might think I was simply organizing paperwork, but that isn't how I felt. I felt like I was fighting for my daughter's future. And I wasn't emotional, I was on a mission. And when I became deeply focused on something, I wanted every detail to be right. Every page mattered. I wasn't looking, and I realized I wasn't looking at years of, I wasn't looking at reports. I was looking at years of love, persistence, and hope bound together in one place. When the binder was finally finished, there was only one thing left to do: tell our story. And the day of the interview finally arrived. I was still at work, and after everybody left for the day, I had made our interview, or whatever you want to call it, our meeting, right after work was finished, planned to be finished. So I took an office and I went in there, shut the door quietly. I was the only one left in the building. And the woman on the other end of the phone immediately put me at ease. And she was kind. She didn't rush me. And she simply said, tell me your story from the beginning. So I did. I told her about my daughter. I told her about school. I told her about searching for answers, meetings, evaluations, interventions, everything. Also nights at Children's Hospital. My daughter was deeply depressed. When the interview ended, she thanked me for sharing our story and explained that there were many families applying and they would make their decision after completing all the interviews. I understood. And then I waited. Those weeks it felt incredibly long, but time was running out and I still didn't know what our future would look like. The day before I was supposed to hear back about that grant, the school contacted us. They had reached an agreement. And that meant we had reached an agreement. It was exactly what I had been hoping and praying for. And the very next day, the organization called and they told me we had been awarded the $10,000 grant. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. And now, because the agreement was already signed, and I thanked them from the bottom of my heart. And I asked them if they would just give that to the next participant, another family. I'm sure it helped. I was so happy either way. And, hanging up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, and that was relief. Not because the journey had been easy, it hadn't, but because my daughter could finally stop wondering where she belonged. She could simply be a student again. Looking back now, I still think about that 3-inch binder sitting in my drawer, years of paperwork, years of meetings. But today, when I look at it, I don't see reports. I see a mother's love, carefully preserved, one page at a time. Once the uncertainty about school was finally behind us, something beautiful began to happen. For the first time in many years, my daughter wasn't spending her energy worrying where she would be going to school. She could simply focus on learning. Little by little, I began seeing the young woman I had always known was there. She trusted her teachers. She was building meaningful relationships. She could simply be herself. The school celebrated every student's individuality. And at graduation, the graduation was amazing. I mean, I have to say, the teachers didn't simply hand out diplomas. They spoke about each student as an individual. They shared funny stories about personal memories and unique qualities. When it was my daughter's turn, I smiled. They lovingly joked about how she almost always managed to spill something on herself. Whether she was eating, doing art, whatever, cooking, always. But it reminded me that they truly knew her, took the time to know her. And she wasn't just a student. Each graduate also received a scholarship. It was divided among many students because they couldn't choose just one. It was unexpected, but we were so grateful for it. When they spoke about my daughter, they talked about the caring young woman she had become and the path she had hoped to follow. And today she's attending community college and to transfer after her first 2 years. She will be going to a state college. When people ask me why she chose that path, my answer is simple: because she knows what it feels like to struggle. And she also knows what it feels like when someone believes in you. And watching her walk across that stage that day wasn't just the end of high school. It was the beginning of the future, of her future. And the moment I realized something, hope had carried us further than fear ever could. As I watched her experience prom and build meaningful relationships, there were experiences I never had. I never went to high school prom. I never had those friendships later. I never walked across the stage to receive a diploma. Later in life, I earned my GED, and I am proud of that accomplishment. I did do some community colleges as well. But I watched my daughter's experience. Each of those milestones, I wasn't thinking about what I had missed. I was simply just grateful that she hadn't. And watching her live those moments filled my heart. But because we had walked every step of that journey together, it meant the world to me. So the next part is about finding myself. As my daughter was finding confidence, I slowly began turning inward. For years, my focus had been on helping her. And now, for the first time in a very long time, I began asking questions about myself. Who was I? What did I really want? Why had so much of my life unfolded the way that it did? I thought about the jobs that excited me and kind of lost interest after a few years. I thought about relationships, 3 marriages, 3 divorces. I thought about how often I had shaped myself around what everyone else seemed to need, while I rarely stopped to ask what I needed. My daughter's journey became the mirror that helps me begin asking those questions. I also began remembering something else as she struggled to read a paragraph and remember what she had just read. I remember doing the same thing. As she described rewriting papers over and over again because they never felt right or because she did it wrong, it was out of order. I remembered doing the same thing. It was as though pieces of my own life were quietly falling into place. I wasn't looking for another diagnosis. I was looking for understanding. That search led me somewhere I never expected. I found myself wandering through bookstores, searching for books about relationships, anxiety, codependency, self-worth, personal growth. I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was just trying to understand the person I had always been. Eventually, those books led me to something that would change me even more. Meditation. I simply wanted relief from the anxiety that had built up for me for so many years. I wanted to quiet the noise in my mind. I wanted peace. I just wanted to quiet the noise. In the quiet, I slowly began rebuilding the relationship that I had with myself. I began creating healthier boundaries. I stopped believing every fearful story that my mind wanted to tell me. I discovered that many of the things I worried about had never actually happened. Little by little, I began replacing fear with awareness, judgment with compassion, survival with hope. Looking back now, I don't believe my healing happened all at once. It happened one quiet morning, one book, one meditation, the small one choice at a time. Why I finally am telling this story. For so many years, I believed my job was to encourage my daughter, that she was worthy, that she could become anything she wanted to become. What I didn't realize at the time was that every lesson I was teaching her, I was also learning for myself. As I encouraged her to believe in herself, I slowly began believing in myself. As I reminded her that she wasn't broken, I began seeing that I wasn't broken either. As I taught her to be courageous, I found my own courage. For much of my life, I had made myself small. I had measured my worth by how well I could please everyone else. I had forgotten that my voice mattered too. Healing wasn't just about understanding my daughter. It was also about learning to validate myself. No one else could do that for me. I had to learn to do that for myself. Today, I know something that took me a lifetime to understand. I'm not small. I am creative. I am loving. I am worthy. And I am deserving of all the good life that life has to offer. And I hope my daughter knows that about herself too, because I have told her. Because in the end, the greatest lesson we learned, wasn't simply how to navigate ADHD. It was how to believe in ourselves. That lesson changed both of our lives. For a long time, I never imagined sharing this story. Not because I was ashamed of my daughter, never. I was proud of her every step of the way. The shame I carried was my own. As I began recognizing so many of my daughter's struggles in myself, I questioned my own life. I wondered why it had taken me so long to understand. Wondered why I spent so many years trying to become who everyone else needed. For years, I wasn't ready to tell this story. I needed time, needed to heal. I needed to grow. I needed time to understand. I wanted to reach a place where I could look back with compassion instead of pain. I didn't want the story to come from anger. I wanted it to come from hope. That day finally arrived. Like so many mornings before, I sat quietly in meditation, as I often do. I ask a simple question: how can I serve more people? I already know the answer: by telling the truth, with love, with hope, and with gratitude. One more thing to follow. I want to thank you for walking this journey and listening if you've made it to this point. When I first began writing, I thought I was simply telling the story of my daughter's school years. Looking back now, I realized it became so much more. It became the story of two lives growing together. A daughter learning to believe in herself and a mother learning to do the very same thing. If you're a parent, I hope this reminds you to trust your instincts and know your child in ways no report, meeting, or evaluation ever can. You know them. Keep asking questions. Keep learning. Never stop believing in them. And if you spent your own life quietly wondering why certain things have always felt harder than they seem for everyone else, I hope you'll offer yourself the same compassion you would offer someone you love. You are not defined by your hardest days. You are not defined by a diagnosis. You are worthy of understanding. You are worthy of kindness. You are worthy of hope. For many years, I ended my morning meditation by asking one simple question: how can I serve more people today? And for a long time, I wasn't ready for the answer. But today I was. I hope our family story helps even one parent feel less alone, and if it helps one person see themselves with greater compassion. I hope if it reminds one child that they are never broken and that every step of this journey has been worth sharing. This is done with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for listening.